When rancher Marcus Hartwell finds a beaten girl tied to a tree with "Comanche Lover" carved above her, he must choose between his safe isolation and protecting someone society has already condemned. But when armed men come to reclaim her, Marcus discovers that redemption sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. Can a man haunted by his own past find the courage to defy an entire town's hatred? A gunshot cracked through the Montana wilderness like breaking bone. Marcus Hartwell's eyes snapped open in his narrow bunk, sweat cold on his skin despite the warm September morning of 1867. The sound had come from his dream again, the same nightmare that visited him 3 times each week, bringing back memories of a wife's final breath and a town's cruel judgment. But this morning felt different. His mare Duchess was making noise in the corral, stamping and snorting like she'd caught scent of a wolf. Marcus rolled from his bed and pulled on his worn leather boots, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Through the small window, he could see his breath in the crisp air, and beyond that, the golden hills of his ranch stretching toward Helena. He'd built this place with his own hands after fleeing town 3 years ago. Every fence post driven deep, every board cut square, every nail hammered straight. The work had saved his sanity when grief might have swallowed him whole. Now 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, Marcus had found the peace that came with being forgotten. The cabin door groaned on its leather hinges as he stepped outside. Duchess whinnied again, her dark eyes fixed on something beyond the pine trees. Marcus had learned to trust his horse's instincts during his years as a cavalry scout. Animals sensed trouble long before men noticed it coming. "What's got you spooked, girl?" he murmured, approaching her pen with slow steps. The morning air carried strange sounds, not the usual creak, babble, or wind through branches, but something that made his stomach tighten. A cry, maybe, or a call for help. It was too faint to be sure. But Duchess kept pointing her ears toward Willow Creek, where the water curved around a stand of cottonwoods. Marcus saddled his mare with quick, practiced movements. His rifle went into its leather boot, and his colt stayed at his hip. Living alone in wild country meant being ready for anything: bears, mountain cats, or the 2-legged kind of trouble that sometimes wandered up from the valleys below. The ride through his pasture took him past 20 head of cattle, good stock he'd bought with his last army pay. They grazed peacefully in the tall grass, their tails swishing at flies. Everything looked normal, but the feeling in his chest said otherwise. As they entered the trees, Duchess picked her way carefully down the rocky slope toward the creek. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and with it, something else. A voice, thin and desperate, calling words he couldn't quite make out. Marcus dismounted near a lightning-split pine and tied Duchess to a low branch. Moving on foot now, he worked his way through the brush until he could see the creek clearly. What he found there made him freeze like a man struck by winter wind. A girl sat tied to a cottonwood tree, her wrists bound with rope, her dress torn and dirty. She couldn't have been more than 17, with dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. But it wasn't her condition that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the words burned into the bark above her head. "Comanche Lover." The letters had been carved deep with a hot iron, probably a branding tool. Whoever had done this wanted to make sure their message lasted. In the frontier territories, those 2 words meant only one thing. This girl had been marked as someone who'd chosen Indians over her own people. Marcus had seen such punishments before during his army days. Settlers who traded with tribes, women who'd been captured and then rescued, anyone who showed kindness to the native peoples, they all faced the same cruel judgment. The girl would be shunned, driven away, or worse. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and Marcus saw no fear in her eyes. Instead, she watched him with the steady gaze of someone who'd already faced the worst and survived it. Her lips were cracked from thirst, but when she spoke, her voice held firm. "Please," she said, "don't leave me here to die." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of madness or sickness that might explain her situation. He found neither. What he saw instead was a young woman who'd been judged by people who didn't know her story, condemned by folks who'd never walked in her shoes. He knew that feeling well. 3 years ago, the good citizens of Helena had driven him from town for marrying a Crow woman named Swift Arrow. They'd called her a savage, him a traitor to his own kind. When she died, giving birth to their child, a baby that lived only minutes, those same people had whispered that it was God's punishment for mixing races. Looking at this girl now, Marcus felt the old anger rising in his chest. But with it came something else. Something he hadn't felt since Swift Arrow's death. The need to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. "What's your name?" he asked, pulling his knife from his belt. "Isabella," she whispered. "Isabella Cruz." Marcus knelt beside the tree and began cutting her ropes. "Well, Isabella Cruz, today's your lucky day." The ropes fell away like shed snakeskin, leaving angry red marks around Isabella's wrists. She rubbed the feeling back into her hands while Marcus offered her water from his canteen. She drank deeply, some of it spilling down her chin, but she didn't seem to care. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked, studying the burn marks on the tree. The wood was still dark, which meant this had happened recently. 2 days, maybe 3. Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. "Hard to tell when you're drifting in and out." Marcus helped her to her feet, noticing how she favored her left ankle. Someone had hurt her badly before tying her here. The thought made his jaw clench, but he kept his voice gentle. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "I can do whatever I need to do." As they walked toward his horse, Isabella began to tell her story in bits and pieces. She'd been traveling with a wagon train from Santa Fe, heading north to meet relatives in Virginia City. Apache raiders had hit them at dawn, scattering people and livestock across the prairie. "I got separated from the others," she said, accepting Marcus's help to mount Duchess. "Wandered for 2 days before I collapsed near a Comanche camp." Marcus swung up behind her, feeling how she trembled despite her brave words. "What happened there?" "A warrior named Grey Wolf found me. I was half dead from thirst and heat." Isabella leaned back against his chest as Duchess started the climb toward the cabin. "He could have killed me, taken my scalp as a trophy. Instead, he gave me water and tended my wounds." The story came out slowly as they rode. Grey Wolf had kept Isabella in his lodge for 4 days, letting her recover while his wife fed her and dressed her injuries. When she was strong enough to travel, he'd given her a beaded medicine pouch and pointed her toward the stage road. "The cavalry patrol found me there," Isabella continued. "When they saw the Comanche beadwork, they decided I was tainted. Said no decent woman would accept gifts from savages." Marcus felt his anger building again. He'd heard such talk too many times, the way some white folks made everything simple by painting all Indians as monsters. It made them feel better about taking land that wasn't theirs. "The wagon master wouldn't take me back," Isabella said. "Said I'd bring bad luck to the train, so the soldiers brought me here and—" She touched the burn marks on her wrists. "They wanted to make sure everyone would know what I was." By now they'd reached the cabin, and Marcus helped Isabella down from the horse. She stood unsteadily, one hand on Duchess's neck for support. In the full light of day, he could see more clearly what had been done to her. Bruises on her face, cuts on her arms, the mark of rope burns around her throat. "Why didn't they just shoot you?" The question came out harder than Marcus intended. Isabella's dark eyes met his. "Because that would have been merciful. They wanted me to suffer first, to serve as a warning to other women who might show kindness to Indians." Marcus led her into the cabin, settling her in the wooden chair beside his small table. The room was simple, a stone fireplace, shelves for his few books, pegs for his clothes. Nothing fancy, but it was clean and warm. "I've got some jerky and hardtack," he said, rummaging through his supplies, "and there's a room in back where you can rest." Isabella accepted the food gratefully, eating small bites like someone whose stomach had forgotten how to handle solid meals. Between bites, she studied Marcus with curious eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Most folks would have left me tied to that tree." Marcus poured coffee into 2 tin cups, buying time to think about his answer. He could have said it was Christian duty, or simple human decency. But looking at this young woman, seeing the same kind of judgment in her eyes that he'd carried for 3 years, he decided to tell the truth. "Because I know what it's like to be marked," he said finally. "To have people decide who you are based on their own fears." He told her about Swift Arrow then, about their brief marriage and the town's reaction to it, about watching his wife die while the doctor took his time coming, claiming he'd been busy with more important patients, about the whispers and cold shoulders that followed him until he finally gave up and left. "So this ranch," Isabella said when he finished, "it's not just your home, it's your hiding place." The words stung because they were true. Marcus had built his life around staying invisible, avoiding the judgment that had once nearly destroyed him. But looking at Isabella now, seeing her courage, despite everything she'd endured, he wondered if hiding was the same as living. Maybe it has been, he said, but maybe that's about to change. Outside, Duchess whinnied nervously, and both Marcus and Isabella turned toward the window. In the distance, a dust cloud was rising from the direction of Helena. Riders were coming, and Marcus had a sick feeling he knew what they wanted. Isabella saw it too. Her face went pale, but she didn't crumble. Instead, she straightened in her chair and touched the Comanche medicine pouch at her waist, the gift that had condemned her. "They've come for me," she said simply. Marcus checked his rifle and made sure his Colt was loaded. He'd spent 3 years running from confrontation, but some fights couldn't be avoided. Some battles had to be fought, whether a man was ready or not. "Let them come," he said. Isabella's eyes snapped open like a trapped animal hearing footsteps. The strange man with kind eyes was cutting the ropes that had rubbed her wrists raw, but she couldn't let herself trust him yet. Too many people had smiled before they hurt her. "Easy now," Marcus said softly, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to harm you." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. 3 days tied to that tree had stolen her strength. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady but gentle. Up close, she could see the sadness living in the lines around his eyes. "Can you ride?" he asked, glancing nervously at the sky. Dark clouds were building over the mountains, and Isabella knew what that meant. Rain would wash away tracks, but it would also bring cold that could kill. "I can try," she whispered, her throat dry as old leather. As Marcus helped her onto his horse, Isabella studied his face. Most white men looked at her like she was dirt on their boots. This one looked at her like she was a person. That scared her almost more than the hate did. People who cared could be hurt, and she'd already caused enough pain. The horse moved carefully down the rocky slope. Isabella gripped the saddle horn, fighting waves of dizziness. She had to tell him the truth before they reached wherever he was taking her. He deserved to know what kind of trouble he was bringing home. "Mister," she started, then realized she didn't know his name. Marcus Hartwell. He didn't look back, just kept watching the trail ahead. "Mr. Hartwell, there's something you need to know." The words felt heavy as stones in her mouth. "What they burned into that tree, it's not exactly a lie." That made him turn around. His blue eyes searched her face, but she didn't see disgust there. "Not yet. My family was traveling from Santa Fe when the Apache attacked." Isabella continued, her voice getting stronger as she talked. "I got separated in the fighting, fell down a steep hill and hit my head on a rock. When I woke up, there was blood everywhere and I couldn't remember which way the wagons had gone." The horse's hooves clicked against stone as they crossed a small stream. The sound reminded Isabella of the clicking beads on the necklace that had started all her troubles. "I wandered for 2 days before I collapsed. That's when he found me." She touched the small leather pouch still tied to her belt. "His name was Running Bear. He was young, maybe 20 summers. His band was camped nearby, following the buffalo herds." Marcus pulled his horse to a stop. They'd reached a clearing where she could see his ranch spread out below them. It looked peaceful, with smoke rising from the chimney and cattle grazing in the pasture. Like the kind of place where families lived and children played. "He could have taken me prisoner," Isabella said. "Could have traded me to other tribes, or worse. Instead, he brought me to his grandmother, an old woman who knew healing herbs. They fed me, gave me clean clothes, tended my wounds." She pulled the leather pouch from her belt and showed Marcus the intricate beadwork. Blue and white patterns swirled across the soft buckskin like frozen water. "Running Bear's grandmother made this. She said the pattern would bring me safe travels. When I was strong enough to walk, Running Bear guided me to the main trail where wagon trains passed. He waited with me for 3 days until a cavalry patrol came by." Marcus took the pouch, turning it over in his weathered hands. His touch was respectful, like he understood it meant something important. The soldiers saw this and decided I was corrupted. Isabella's cheeks burned with shame, but she forced herself to continue. "They said no decent woman would accept gifts from savages." The patrol leader, Captain Garrison, he got real angry when I tried to explain. Said I was probably planning to lead war parties to other wagon trains. The wind picked up, making the aspen leaves dance like silver coins. Isabella shivered, remembering how cold Garrison's eyes had been. "They took me back to the wagon train, but the wagon master wouldn't let me rejoin my family. Said I'd bring bad luck and Indian trouble. My own uncle. Her voice broke a little. My own uncle agreed with him. Said the family name couldn't survive the shame. Marcus handed the pouch back to her, and Isabella was surprised to see anger flickering in his expression. But it wasn't directed at her. So they left you, he said quietly. 3 men volunteered to deal with the problem. Isabella's hands shook as she tied the pouch back to her belt. They rode me out to that tree and carved those words to warn other women what happens when you forget your place. Said the Indians or the wolves would finish what they started. She looked down at Marcus, expecting to see the familiar disgust creep across his features. Instead, his jaw was tight with barely controlled fury. Mr. Hartwell, if you change your mind about helping me, I'll understand. I know what people will say if they find out I'm here. What they'll do to you for helping someone like me. Marcus guided his horse down the last slope toward the ranch house. The building looked solid and welcoming, with a wide front porch and windows that glowed with warm lamplight. Isabella tried not to hope too much. Hope was dangerous when you'd lost everything. Isabella, Marcus said, and she was surprised he remembered her name. I learned something a long time ago. The people who talk loudest about morality are usually the ones with the least of it. As they approached the house, Isabella noticed the careful way everything was arranged. The woodpile was neat, the fence posts straight, the garden rows perfectly aligned. This was a man who took pride in his work, who built things to last. Besides, Marcus added, dismounting and reaching up to help her down, Running Bear and his grandmother showed you more Christian charity than any of those wagon train folks did. Far as I'm concerned, that makes them better people than the ones who left you to die. Isabella's feet touched solid ground, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been safety. But as Marcus led her toward the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. The warm kitchen wrapped around Isabella like a mother's embrace. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly warm, to sit at a real table with clean plates and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Marcus moved around the small space with quiet efficiency, ladling stew into bowls and slicing thick chunks of cornbread. When did you last eat? He asked, setting a steaming bowl in front of her. Isabella tried to remember. Time had become strange during her ordeal. The soldiers gave me hardtack 2 days ago, I think, maybe 3. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though her stomach cramped with hunger. Marcus sat across from her, but she noticed he barely touched his own food. Instead, he watched her with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. You mentioned your family, he said gently. Are they still traveling west? The spoon trembled in Isabella's hand. She'd been trying not to think about her parents, her little brother Miguel, her cousin Rosa. I don't know. The wagon master was heading for California. Papa wanted to buy land there, start a farm. Her voice got smaller. They probably think I'm dead. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. His skin was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. We'll find a way to get word to them. Let them know you're alive. Isabella pulled her hand away, not because his touch wasn't welcome, but because she didn't deserve such kindness. Mr. Hartwell, you don't understand. Even if we could reach them, they might not want me back. When Uncle Fernando agreed to leave me behind, the words stuck in her throat like thorns. Then your uncle is a fool. Marcus's voice carried quiet conviction. And if your parents let fear rule them, that's their loss. Isabella looked around the kitchen, taking in the details that spoke of a solitary life. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 set of silverware in the dish rack, a single chair by the fireplace. Everything neat and orderly, but empty of the warm chaos that came with family. You live alone, she observed. Marcus's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Most of the time. But you built this place for more than 1 person. Isabella gestured toward the extra bedroom she'd glimpsed, the large table that could seat 6. This was meant to be a family home. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling fire and the wind rattling the windows. Outside, the promised storm was arriving, bringing with it the sharp scent of snow. I was married once, Marcus finally said. Her name was Swift Arrow. She was Crow, daughter of a respected elder. I met her when I was territorial governor's aide, negotiating treaties. Isabella set down her spoon, sensing this was a story Marcus didn't tell often. The officials in Helena weren't pleased when I married her. Said it sent the wrong message to have a government man taking an Indian wife. Marcus stared into his untouched stew. But Swift Arrow was the smartest, bravest woman I'd ever met. She could track a deer through rocky ground, heal sick animals with wild herbs, speak 4 languages fluently. What happened to her? She got pregnant 2 years after we married. We were so happy, planning for the baby, talking about names. Marcus's voice grew thick with old pain. But the birth went wrong. The doctor from town refused to come help an Indian woman, and the midwife from Swift Arrow's village was 3 days' ride away. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. She'd seen enough death to know how quickly joy could turn to sorrow. I lost them both that winter, my wife and my son. Marcus pushed his bowl away, the food cold and forgotten. After the funeral, the good people of Helena made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. Said I'd brought shame to the territory by mixing races. So I came out here, built this place, tried to forget. But you didn't forget, Isabella said softly. No, I didn't forget. Marcus looked directly at her then, and Isabella saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. That's why I understand what those people did to you. They're so afraid of anything different, anything they don't understand, that they'd rather destroy it than learn from it. The storm hit the cabin like a living thing, rattling the shutters and sending smoke back down the chimney. Marcus rose to bank the fire, his movements careful and practiced. Isabella watched him work, thinking about the loneliness that must fill this house most days. Mr. Hartwell, she said, I don't want to bring trouble to your door. If staying here puts you in danger, call me Marcus. He settled back in his chair, studying her face. And you're not bringing trouble. The trouble was already there, hiding in people's hearts like a poison. Sometimes it takes something like this to make it show itself. Isabella pulled the Comanche beadwork from her pocket, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. Running Bear's grandmother said these designs tell stories. This one here, she pointed to a series of interconnected circles, represents the connection between all living things. She said hate comes from forgetting that connection. Smart woman, Marcus said. She also said something else. Isabella hesitated, not sure if she should share the old woman's words. She looked at my palm and said I would face a choice between safety and truth. That choosing safety would save my life, but choosing truth would save my soul. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the cabin's foundations. Marcus glanced toward the windows, where rain was beginning to streak the glass. What do you think she meant? He asked. Isabella folded the beadwork carefully, tucking it back into her pocket. I think she knew this would happen. The soldiers, the wagon train, being left behind. I think she was warning me that I'd have chances to hide who I really am, to deny what happened with her grandson, to take the safe path. And instead, I told the truth, even when it meant losing everything. Isabella met Marcus's steady gaze. I'm still telling the truth, even though it might cost you everything too. The wind howled around the cabin like a hungry beast. But inside the kitchen, warmed by fire and honest conversation, Isabella felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Not just safety, but belonging. The dangerous, fragile beginning of home. Marcus, she said, testing his name on her tongue. Thank you. For everything. He nodded, standing to clear the dishes. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. But as Isabella made her way to the small bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that what came next had already been set in motion. Somewhere out in the storm, forces were gathering that would test both their resolves in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the sound of Marcus checking the locks on all the doors. The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning calm like glass hitting stone. Marcus dropped his coffee cup and grabbed his rifle as 6 riders charged toward his cabin, dust clouds billowing behind them like angry storm clouds. Isabella burst through the kitchen door, her face pale as fresh snow. They found me, she whispered, clutching the doorframe with white knuckles. Captain Wade Garrison sat tall on his black stallion, his brass buttons gleaming in the early sunlight. Behind him rode 5 soldiers, their hands resting on their gun handles like hungry wolves ready to strike. Marcus had heard stories about Garrison, how he collected bounties on runaway slaves before the war, how he burned Indian villages and called it justice. Morning, Hartwell, Garrison called out, his voice smooth as snake oil. beautiful day to clean up some trash, don't you think? Marcus stepped onto his porch, keeping his rifle low but ready. State your business, Captain, then get off my land. Garrison's laugh sounded like breaking branches. Oh, I think you know why we're here. That little Comanche lover hiding behind your skirts needs to come with us. She's got some explaining to do about why she was cozying up to savages. Isabella appeared beside Marcus, her chin raised high despite the fear dancing in her dark eyes. I told you already, they saved my life when your people left me to die. Saved you? Garrison spat into the dirt, more like corrupted you. No decent white woman lets an Indian touch her and lives to tell about it. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she didn't back down. Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when bullies picked on smaller kids back in school. The girl stays, Marcus said quietly. She's done nothing wrong. Garrison's eyes narrowed to slits. You defending her makes you just as guilty, Hartwell. Maybe we should carve Indian lover into your forehead too. One of Garrison's men, a young private with nervous hands, shifted in his saddle. Captain, maybe we should just take her back to town for a proper trial. Shut your mouth, Morrison, Garrison snapped. I don't need advice from some green kid who can't tell right from wrong. Marcus noticed how the young soldier flinched, how his eyes showed doubt about following orders. That could be useful later. Tell you what, Hartwell, Garrison continued, pulling out a long rope with practiced ease. You hand over the girl, and we'll make this quick. She won't suffer much. What do you mean? Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady despite everything. Garrison's smile showed too many teeth. Same thing we do to all Indian sympathizers. Tie you behind a horse and drag you through town until folks see what happens to traitors. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. He'd heard about Garrison's methods, but hearing them spoken out loud made his stomach twist like a snake. That's murder, the young private said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's justice? Garrison corrected. Sometimes justice ain't pretty, boy. Sometimes it's messy and loud and leaves stains on the ground. But it sends a message that keeps good people safe. Isabella's hand found Marcus's arm. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. He killed those Crow families last spring, she whispered. Standing Wolf told me before he died. Garrison burned their camp while the warriors were away hunting. Marcus's heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. If Isabella was right, then Garrison wasn't just cruel. He was a cold-blooded killer who hid behind his uniform. You're making a big mistake, Hartwell, Garrison said, unwinding his rope slowly. Hand her over now, or we'll take her anyway. And maybe we'll take you too, for being an accomplice. The other soldiers looked uncomfortable now. Even tough men had limits, and dragging a young woman to death went beyond what most could stomach. But fear of Garrison kept them quiet. Marcus made his choice. He raised his rifle until it pointed straight at Garrison's chest. The girl stays. Leave now, or face the consequences. Garrison's face turned red as a sunset. You threatening an officer of the territorial militia, Hartwell? I'm protecting an innocent person from a murderer, Marcus replied. Big difference. The standoff stretched like a tight wire ready to snap. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would break first. The tension crackled like lightning between storm clouds as both sides measured each other's resolve. Marcus kept his rifle trained on Garrison while calculating distances and cover options. 6 against 2 made for terrible odds, but he'd faced worse during the war. You got 10 seconds to reconsider, Hartwell, Garrison said, his hand moving toward his pistol. After that, we take what we came for, and you can explain to St. Peter why you died protecting Indian-loving trash. Isabella stepped sideways, putting space between herself and Marcus. Smart girl, she understood that spreading out would make it harder for Garrison's men to target them both at once. Captain, the young private spoke up again. Maybe you should grow a backbone, Morrison, Garrison snarled. We got our orders from Colonel Bradford himself. Bring back the girl, dead or alive. Marcus caught the lie immediately. Bradford was a decent man who wouldn't order the murder of an innocent girl. Garrison was acting on his own twisted sense of justice, using his rank to intimidate his men into following illegal orders. What orders? Isabella called out boldly. Show us the written command from your colonel. Garrison's face went from red to purple. I don't need to show you nothing, you little. Because there are no written orders, Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. You're here for revenge because I know what you did to Standing Wolf's people. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Two of Garrison's men exchanged worried glances. They'd heard rumors about the Crow Village massacre, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Careful with your words, girl, Garrison warned. Lies can get you killed faster than the truth. Then let me tell you some truth, Isabella said, reaching into her dress pocket. She pulled out a small beaded pouch, the same one the Comanche brave had given her, but now Marcus could see it held more than just memories. Isabella opened the pouch and pulled out a military button, the kind officers wore on their dress uniforms. It was tarnished with age and stained with something dark that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Standing Wolf gave me this before he died, she said, holding it up so everyone could see. He took it from the officer who murdered his wife and children, the officer who burned their camp and lied about it being a battle. Garrison went very still, like a snake preparing to strike. Where did you really get that? From a dying man who wanted justice for his family, Isabella replied. A man who described the officer perfectly, tall, blonde hair, scar on his left cheek from an old knife fight. Marcus looked at Garrison's face and saw the jagged white line running from his ear to his jaw. The pieces fell into place like dominoes toppling over. She's lying, Garrison shouted, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. I never seen that button before in my life. Private Morrison leaned forward in his saddle, studying the button more carefully. Captain, that looks like the one you lost during the spring campaign. Remember? You were real upset about it. The words hit Garrison like a physical blow. His face went white as winter snow, and his hand trembled as it reached for his gun. Morrison, you idiot, Garrison screamed. Shut your mouth before I shut it permanent. But the damage was done. The other soldiers were putting pieces together, remembering things that hadn't made sense before. How Garrison had returned from patrol with blood-stained clothes. How he'd been jumpy and mean-tempered for weeks after the supposed battle. How the official report didn't match what the scouts had seen. Dear God, whispered another soldier, a grizzled sergeant with gray whiskers. Captain, please tell me you didn't kill civilians. Garrison's control snapped like a broken rope. They were all hostiles. Every last one of them. Women teaching their brats to hate white folks. Old men planning raids on settlers. I did what needed doing. The confession hit the assembled men like a thunderbolt. Even the most hardened soldiers looked sick at the thought of murdering women and children in their sleep. That's enough, Sergeant Williams said firmly. Captain Garrison, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of non-combatants and filing false reports. Garrison spun toward his sergeant, eyes wild with desperation and rage. You can't arrest me. I'm your commanding officer. Not anymore, Williams replied sadly. Not after what you just admitted. But Garrison wasn't finished. With the quick reflexes of a cornered animal, he drew his pistol and aimed it straight at Isabella's heart. If I'm going down, she's coming with me. Marcus moved without thinking, throwing himself sideways as Garrison's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder, and everything changed forever. The first gunshot cracked like thunder across the Montana morning, sending birds exploding from the trees in a black cloud of panic. Marcus dove behind the wooden water trough as Captain Garrison's bullet splintered the cabin door where his head had been just seconds before. Should have minded your own business, Hartwell, Garrison roared, spurring his horse sideways as Marcus returned fire. The captain's men scattered, seeking cover behind fence posts and the old barn. Isabella pressed herself against the cabin wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the window, she watched Marcus reload with steady hands despite the chaos erupting around him. The young private, Nathan Porter, sat frozen on his horse, his rifle pointing at the ground instead of at Marcus. Porter! Garrison screamed. Shoot him, you coward! But Nathan's face had gone white as fresh snow. Captain, this ain't right. She's just a girl. Garrison's face twisted with rage. He swung his rifle toward his own soldier. Then you're a traitor too. The shot meant for Nathan went wide as Marcus's bullet found its mark. Garrison jerked in his saddle, crimson spreading across his blue uniform coat. His horse reared, and he tumbled to the hard-packed earth with a sickening thud. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunshots. Smoke drifted lazily from rifle barrels, while the remaining soldiers stared at their fallen captain. Isabella stepped from the cabin, Garrison's own pistol steady in her small hands. "I took this from his holster while you were all watching Marcus," she said quietly. "Captain Garrison was going to shoot that boy for showing mercy." Nathan slid from his saddle, his legs shaking like aspen leaves in a storm. "Is he?" Marcus knelt beside Garrison, pressing fingers to the man's throat. "He's alive, but he needs a doctor fast." "The nearest doctor is in Helena," Nathan said. "That's a day's ride." Isabella walked over to where Garrison lay groaning in the dirt. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth, and his breathing came in short, painful gasps. She looked down at him without pity. "Before you die," she said, her voice carrying across the yard like a church bell, "tell them about Standing Wolf's village. Tell them about the children." Garrison's eyes widened with fear and pain. I don't know what you mean." "You burned their teepees while the warriors were hunting buffalo," Isabella continued. 12 women, 7 children. You shot them down like rabbits and reported it as a fierce battle against hostile warriors." Nathan's face went gray. "Captain, is that true?" The other soldiers gathered closer, their faces showing the first seeds of doubt about the man they'd followed without question. One of them, a grizzled sergeant named Bill Murphy, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "I wondered about them battle reports," Murphy said slowly. "Never found no weapons at that village, just women's things and children's toys." Garrison tried to speak, but only bloody foam emerged from his lips. His eyes rolled back, and he went still. "He's dead," Marcus announced, standing and brushing dirt from his knees. Isabella felt no satisfaction at the captain's passing, only a hollow ache where justice should have been. He took his secrets with him. But Nathan shook his head, his young face set with new determination. "No, ma'am, he didn't. I can testify to what you just said, and I bet others can too, once they know it's safe to speak up." Murphy nodded grimly. "Boy's right. Garrison had a way of making folks keep quiet, but dead men can't threaten nobody." As they wrapped Garrison's body in a horse blanket, Nathan told them about other strange orders the captain had given over the past year. Patrols that returned with stories that didn't add up, supply wagons that went missing, money that disappeared from the regiment's funds. "He was stealing from the army too," Nathan said, "selling rifles to anyone with cash, including some of the same Indians we were supposed to be fighting." Isabella looked at Marcus with wide eyes. He was starting his own war to cover up his crimes. The sun climbed higher as they dug Garrison's grave beneath the cottonwoods by Willow Creek. The work went slowly, each shovelful of earth feeling like a small victory against the corruption the captain had represented. "What happens now?" Marcus asked as they finished packing the soil over the grave. Nathan straightened his shoulders, suddenly looking older than his 21 years. "Now, we ride to Helena and tell the truth. All of it. The army needs to know what Garrison was doing." Murphy and the other soldiers mounted their horses, their faces serious but no longer hostile. Before they rode away, Murphy touched the brim of his hat to Isabella. "Ma'am, I want you to know we ain't all like him. Some of us remember what honor means." As the dust from their departure settled over the ranch, Isabella and Marcus stood side by side, watching the riders disappear over the eastern ridge. The crisis had passed, but both knew their lives had changed forever in ways they couldn't yet understand. Winter came early to the Montana Territory in 1867, painting the world in shades of white and silver that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Inside Marcus's cabin, Isabella stirred a pot of venison stew while snow piled against the windows like nature's own curtain, shutting out the cold world beyond. 3 months had passed since Garrison's death, and the Army's investigation had turned up crimes that shocked even hardened military men. Nathan Porter, promoted to sergeant for his courage in speaking truth, had become a regular visitor to the ranch, bringing news from Helena and supplies they couldn't make themselves. "The territorial governor wants to meet you both," Nathan announced during his latest visit, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the warm cabin. "Word spread about what happened here. Folks are calling you heroes." Isabella laughed, a sound like water over smooth stones. "Heroes don't hide in the mountains all winter." But Marcus understood what Nathan meant. The story of the lonely rancher who'd stood up to corrupt soldiers had traveled from town to town, growing larger with each telling. More importantly, other victims of Garrison's cruelty had found the courage to speak up, and the army was finally cleaning house. There's something else, Nathan said, accepting a cup of hot coffee gratefully. The territorial legislature is talking about making you sheriff of Cedar Ridge, Marcus. The town's growing fast with all the new mining claims, and they need someone they can trust. Marcus looked out at his cattle, sturdy shapes moving slowly through the snow toward the hay he'd put out that morning. He'd built this ranch as a retreat from the world's judgment, but maybe it was time to rejoin that world on his own terms. "What do you think?" he asked Isabella, who was mending a shirt by the firelight. She set down her needle and thread, considering carefully. "I think some battles are worth fighting, and some bridges are worth building." That evening, after Nathan had ridden back to Helena, Isabella and Marcus sat before the fire talking about the future. The Comanche beadwork still decorated her wrist, no longer a mark of shame, but a reminder of survival and unexpected kindness. "My father had a saying," Isabella said, her voice soft in the flickering light. "He said that flowers grow best in soil that's been broken and turned over. Maybe that's what happened to us." Marcus reached for her hand, marveling at how something so terrible could have led to something so right. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was, before the fever took him." Isabella's eyes grew distant with memory. "He always said that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay with you when staying gets difficult." Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin felt warm and safe and full of possibility. They talked until the fire burned low, making plans for spring and the life they wanted to build together. When March finally melted the snow and painted the valley green again, Nathan returned with official papers and a badge that gleamed like a promise in the morning sun. "Sheriff Marcus Hartwell," Nathan said with a grin, "has a nice sound to it." The town of Cedar Ridge had indeed grown over the winter. New buildings lined what passed for a main street, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as more families arrived seeking their fortunes in the Montana territory. Isabella proved as valuable to the community as she was to Marcus. Her knowledge of healing plants, learned from her brief time with the Comanche, saved lives when the doctor couldn't make it through bad weather. Her fluency in Spanish helped resolve disputes with Mexican miners who'd come north seeking gold. But it was her quiet strength that people remembered most. The way she faced down troublemakers with nothing but steady eyes and calm words. How she defended other women who found themselves judged by society's narrow rules. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Marcus found her planting wildflowers behind their cabin, now expanded with 2 more rooms and a proper front porch. The seeds came from all over the territory. Prairie blooms from the eastern plains, mountain varieties from the high country, and desert flowers she'd traded for with travelers from the south. "What will you call this garden?" Marcus asked, watching her work with gentle hands. Isabella smiled, dirt smudged on her cheek and happiness shining in her dark eyes. "I think I'll call it the Garden of Second Chances." That summer, as Cedar Ridge's first sheriff, Marcus found that justice came in many forms. Sometimes it meant stopping a fight with words rather than fists. Sometimes it required standing firm against men who thought their money made them above the law. And sometimes it simply meant treating every person with dignity, regardless of what others might whisper about their past. The badge on his chest carried weight, but not the kind that bent his shoulders. This was the weight of responsibility freely chosen, of trust earned rather than inherited. As autumn painted the mountains gold once again, exactly 1 year after he'd found Isabella tied to that cottonwood tree, Marcus stood on their porch watching the sun set over the valley. His wife, they'd married quietly in June, worked beside him, hanging laundry that snapped like flags in the mountain breeze. In the distance, a meadowlark called across the growing town, its song carrying on the wind like a promise that some stories, no matter how dark they begin, can find their way to joy. The ranch that had once been a hiding place had become a foundation for building something better. And in the garden behind the cabin, wildflowers from across the territory bloomed together in a riot of color, proving that beauty could grow from the most unlikely soil when tended with care and watered with hope.